as you can see, it's a little bit more colorful. So in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to tell you about our family history in Poland, our properties, and our quest for restitution. I think a glimpse of our family history, thank you. I think a glimpse of our family history will be helpful in understanding the injustices my family endured after World War II. I repeat, after the war in post-war Poland. The Germans were gone, it was post-war. So the injustices forced my father, Simcha Engelman, to leave Poland forever. The injustices that deprived us of our heritage and our properties for 71 years until today. So our roots in Poland go back more than 500 years. So roughly when Columbus was crossing the ocean, my family settled in Poland. A lot of the information I will give you today comes from more than 30 hours of audio tapes and videotapes my father, Simcha Engelman, recorded for us and for future generations, and from corroborating information posted online by Polish historians. I'm going to give you the highlights of the last 150 years of family history because they're relevant to our story. So the first I'm going to tell you, so my family were the Engelmans and the Schafrans. I'm going to first tell you about the Engelmans. They were very well known in Poland. They weren't just well known in the Jewish community, they were prominent nationally. And here's why. They were known primarily for their patriotism and their generosity to all Poles. So my great-grandfather was Aaron Engelman, born in roughly 1831. He lived in Bologna. He was the most prominent of all. Aaron was a fierce patriot who fought for Polish independence, who funded the partisans and who bailed them out of jail, which we found out 2 days ago when we were there. He was only a small handful of Jews to earn, the Poland's highest military honor, the Virtuti Militari. He donated his own land for a cemetery, which we hiked to the other day, in what is now Kaplan Forest, which was his land. There are 72 partisans buried in Kaplan Forest that were buried by my great-grandfather. That cemetery was like Arlington National Cemetery is in the United States. That's where the presidents and vice presidents would go to commemorate Polish Independence Day. Okay. During wars, Aaron turned his house into a hospital, which was run by my great-grandmother, his wife, Leah. Aaron had an official title. He was named Patriot of Poland, Yapolski Polski. It was quite an honor. School children would be sent to meet him and to hear him speak. A street in Bologna is named after him, Ulica Arona Engelmana. As you can see, it is still there today, and we walked the length of it 2 days ago for the first time. Aaron Engelman was murdered by the Nazis at age 109 in Warsaw, where he was living then. But when he died, Poles and Jews marched through the streets, and this would have been 1940, so it was during the war. Poles and Jews marched through the streets of Poland carrying flags and reciting patriotic slogans in his honor, in defiance of the German invasion. So one of Aaron's 13 children, 10 of whom lived to adulthood, was my grandfather, Chaim Engelman. And as they say, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Chaim was also extremely patriotic and extremely generous. He was a landowner and a businessman. He had a bank of which he was chairman of the board, but he was best known for his generosity and kindness, especially to Poles in need. He would empty his pockets whenever approached by anybody poor, never counting what he gave, he just gave. He was also a speaker during Constitution Day and Independence Day. Like his father, he was a featured speaker and dignitary. In fact, Chaim was so highly regarded that he was elected to the Polish Sejm. He married my grandmother, Chaya Sura Shafran, from a wealthy Pultusk family, the Shafrans. They lived in Pultusk until about 1926, when they moved their family of 9 children to a big farm owned by the Shafrans. That's in Makov Mazowiecka, Krasny Shields, between there. It was very, very large property. That's where my father grew up. My grandparents eventually left the farm, but my father stayed behind and managed that vast amount of land until September 1st, 1939, when he was ordered to leave. So that brings us to, this is an abbreviated family tree, as you can see. That brings us to my father's sister and my father, the only 2 survivors of their immediate family. So my Aunt Lena was, in 1939, when the war started, a young woman studying history at the University of Warsaw. She took it upon herself to take 32 Jewish war orphans to Kazakhstan by herself. She asked the Polish government in exile for financial assistance, and because she was so well known, they sent it to her. When she got to Kazakhstan, with the money, she opened a Polish school where she taught not only the orphans, but other Polish children living in Kazakhstan. She fed, clothed, and took care of those orphans until 1946, when she brought them back, and she and my father made arrangements for them to be sent as a group to a kibbutz in what was then Palestine, now Israel. So my father was Simcha Engelman. He worked in the underground at the beginning of the war, smuggling Jews out of Poland into Russian territory, until he was caught and sent to the camps. In the camps where typhus was rampant, he would either give or share his meager rations, 1 piece of bread and a bowl of soup, with those who were sick. He fed and nursed them as best he could, and he saved many lives that way, but he also earned the respect of the guards, which helped him to survive. In the worst imaginable circumstances, my father maintained his dignity throughout, and he gave Poland a good name, as the guards often remarked. So I'm still researching the history of the Shafran family. There isn't too much online, to tell you the truth. But Moshe Shafran, my great-grandfather, was wealthy and very philanthropic, like the Engelmans. He had a textile business, but most of his wealth derived from owning a great deal of property. He owned property on 3 streets in the heart of Pultusk, right in downtown Pultusk, right on Rinnik, right on the market, and the large farm that I mentioned earlier where my father grew up. Okay, so I'm going to let my father tell you about those properties.
Poland was born in Pultusk, Poland, February 5th, 1914. Our family was 9 children at home. They consider us for rich people. My grandfather and mother's father left us 8 buildings, 3 floors, was 23 stores, of 500 rooms on 3 streets. Street Piotrowski, second street was Winterjanska, the longest, and the other one was Rinne. Also, we have a big farm, like 15,000 acres. Then was Smolak, there was Pienki, there was Novina, there was Zamostek. This was the name of the field. Kretka, Sapiecek, Jędrzej, Zaruch, Kempa, all the rest, I don't remember the names. Each part, being it was so much land, we didn't use for ourselves, or we could use maybe 25%. And the rest, we lend out to farmers. Until now, I don't know what's happened. I couldn't go over there after the war, 1946, because it was dangerous with risk of my life. Because this time, some anti-Semite killed the rest of the survivors.
Okay, so the rents from those Pultusk properties were substantial. They were substantial enough to support much of a large family of about 60 people. The produce from the part of the farm that my family farmed, which included hay, 32-year-old horses every year, beef, chicken, potatoes, grain, fish, and chicken feed, among other products, were given by the Engelmans and the Shafrans to the Polish army and to the Polish government to pay their property taxes. Our properties were very valuable then, and I would guess that they're even more valuable today. So now I'm going to tell you about our quest for restitution. It began in 1946. My father returns to Poland, and like many survivors, he spent months looking for family members in Warsaw, where people registered, and in Lodz, where the trains came in. But of his immediate family, of his parents, brothers, sisters, their family, only he and his sister Lena survived. So, with his parents and grandparents gone, my father knew he had to go to court to claim his properties. Very unfortunately, he didn't have any money and he couldn't afford to hire a lawyer. So he knew he had no choice but to represent himself. He went to court and he brought witnesses with him, people who knew the families and people who had worked for the families. The court in 1946 found sufficient evidence to grant him the possession of the Pultusk property. The records are all there, as they have been since 1946. But as you know, and is well documented, Jewish survivors who returned, and maybe it was Jewish survivors who had property, faced a hostile, dangerous, and threatening environment. I'm just going to give you one example from my father's personal experience. The night that my father went to court, he decided to stay in Pultusk overnight. He went to a rooming house to sleep. He knew the proprietor. About 11 o'clock at night, he went to bed. All of a sudden, he hears a commotion. And then he hears the familiar voice of a violent and known anti-Semite yelling to the proprietor that he had heard my father, the Jew, was back, and he had come to finish him off. My father knew that it was not an idle threat, so he jumped out of bed and ran out. He jumped out of a window, pulling on his pants while he was running outside. Luckily, there were no street lights in Pultusk at that time. So then he decided to go to the farm we had grown up in, which he had managed in Podosh, to see what happened to that property. And On his way there, he met two Jewish men who were running, literally running the other way. So he stopped them and he said, what's going on? What's happening? And they said, if you go any closer to the farm, you will be killed. So he left Podosh without ever finding out without ever seeing his farm again. He never got there. So as you see, it was simply too dangerous for him to stay in Poland. Even though his family was famous for their patriotism and an integral part of Polish society just a few years earlier. They had no choice but to leave Poland, and they were afraid to ever return. They were driven out. The door slammed in their face after 500 years. My family, who fed the Polish army with the meat and the produce from their farm, who grew horses for the Polish army and the hay to feed all the horses. My family, who fought for Polish independence and who were so well known for their patriotism and their generosity to all Poles. They were Poles who loved their country. They were even considered Polish heroes. They just happened to be Jews. So instead of being welcomed back to restart their lives here as they thought, they were driven out and their property stolen by, well, I can't tell you. You know why I can't tell you? Because we have no idea still what happened to those properties. And sadly, my father didn't live long enough to find out. For the rest of his life after leaving Poland, first in Israel and then in the United States, he every time he read in the newspaper about any kind of restitution, Swiss restitution, German restitution, whatever kind of restitution he applied, always mentioning his Polish properties and property that belonged to other family members who had perished. But nothing ever came of it because Poland has not yet passed a restitution law, and we could not apply to Poland directly. Until my father died in 2005 at age 91, he wanted justice. You can just imagine his frustration every time he read about reparations in any other country. He wanted his property back too, but how? So our first break came in 2003, and this is all by chance, when I happened to meet Stuart Eisenstadt at his book signing, and you all know who he is, right? He negotiated the Swiss and German reparations, and he's very well known in the restitution field. Anyway, he's worked tirelessly for justice and for restitution. Through his contacts, we were introduced to a lawyer in Warsaw who we hired to look into the court records. So in 2004, she looked at the records and found that they were intact. They were indeed there as they had been since 1946. But then she told us that there was nothing that we could do because Poland didn't have a restitution law. So we hit another dead end. Very frustrating. Another 12 years went by until about a year and a half ago, quite by chance, one night my husband Don and I were watching the movie Woman in Gold with friends of ours who were visiting. And it turns out that our friend happened to know Randy Schoenberg quite well, the lawyer depicted in that movie. It was Randy who introduced me to Michael Basler, and so here we are today. And here's the last point I'd like to make. For decade after decade after decade, we had no idea where to turn or how to even go about seeking restitution for our Polish properties. Also, my father, like some other people, couldn't afford to hire lawyers. That there has been no path to restitution of Polish property and that there is still none today is truly a travesty of justice for a family like ours. So it is in their memory and on behalf of families like ours who lost everything and almost everyone that I'm here today with the hope that one day soon, with your help and your continued work on restitution, that one day soon justice will prevail. How many generations have already been impacted by Poland's failure to pass a restitution law? We've been waiting 71 long years. Please, the time has come to end this injustice and this chaos that we heard about this morning. So, the government of Poland itself sees the importance of restitution of its own property that has been looted. We hope the government will act now to enable restitution of the property stolen from our family. It's very important to us. Thank you very much for listening.